Elizabeth I is considered one of the greatest queens to have ever reigned, and the Tudor Monarch was a fierce lady who knew what she wanted. She was strong-willed, and many people would think twice about crossing her. But early into her reign, she suffered from a bout of a very deadly illness that had been around in England for some time. Smallpox over the years killed millions around the globe, but it even affected the English throne, as Elizabeth I believed at one point she would succumb to the deadly disease. But this plunged England into crisis, as at the time there were no plans drawn up for her successor. Elizabeth did eventually recover, but she was haunted and reminded of her battle with smallpox every single day. But what is the story of the deadly disease that almost killed Elizabeth I? Elizabeth I's bout of near-fatal illness in 1562 exposed how vulnerable England was with a female monarch who did not have any children or heirs. This left the country vulnerable to attack and invasion, and for a brief 2-week period, where the Queen was suffering, the governance of the country was shaky and tenuous. In the autumn of 1562, Elizabeth I was moving towards her 4th anniversary of her ascension as Queen, and was already one of the most powerful women across the continent. She had restored the Protestant faith across the country, and many European bachelors wanted to marry her, which many believed would help secure the security and throne of England, and then provide heirs to the Tudor dynasty. But there were many rumours that Elizabeth wanted to marry one of her own subjects, Robert Dudley, the Earl of Leicester. Many in her royal court were shocked at this, and they believed Elizabeth would be marrying below her station. It would not get any alliances or extra power from a marriage. Also, Dudley's wife had recently died in suspicious circumstances, and her husband was alleged to have been involved in this. But around this time, the Queen was staying at Hampton Court Palace, the favoured residence of her father, Henry VIII, and she became intrigued that her cousin, Mary Queen of Scots, had returned to Scotland, but she was taken ill. She had a fever and chills, and following writing to Mary, she then had a hot bath to make herself feel better. But this was just not a common cold or a mild illness, and after a visit from the royal doctor, Elizabeth I was diagnosed with smallpox. This was a disease which had been circulating around court, and a number of female courtiers had fallen ill, but most of them survived. There was no cure for the disease at the time, and 30% of adults who contracted it would die. Sufferers had many different symptoms, including headaches and sore throats, but the biggest indicator of the disease was pus-filled sores that appeared all over the skin. Many of those who suffered from the illness would then be left with these scars on their body, and contact with the scabs was also a way that disease could be spread. The Queen was ill for a number of days before these marks erupted on her skin. At first they were small spots, but then they turned into blisters which scabbed over. She was attended on by her closest female attendants and ladies, and she was also administered many different treatments. One was the red treatment, which was Japanese and was used since the 12th century. The Queen was wrapped from the neck down in red cloth, and it was hoped that this cloth would prevent the skin from scarring, which the Queen greatly worried about. She wanted to maintain her image of virtue and beauty, and at the time she was 29 and looking for a husband, and she was worried that the pox scars would get in the way of her search for a husband, and she was worried that men would not find her attractive, which would then cause a problem with the succession. Elizabeth was the final surviving legitimate child of Henry VIII, and with this it was down to her to continue the Tudor dynasty. It wasn't certain who would reign after her, but after smallpox it was believed to have been a point of contention and debate at court. Mary Queen of Scots, Elizabeth's Catholic cousin, was the natural hereditary heir for Elizabeth, but she was Catholic, and her entire family, the Stuarts, had been barred from the line of succession established by Henry VIII. Only Catholics at court favoured this, but others turned towards Protestant alternatives, including Catherine Grey, the sister of Lady Jane Grey, the 9-Day Queen, who was a descendant of Mary Tudor, the younger sister of Elizabeth's father. Many believed she had the best claim, but was put into the Tower of London as she married without the Queen's permission. Elizabeth I believed she would die from smallpox, as she was rather ill, and she wanted to protect England as best she could. She tried to give the power to Robert Dudley to protect the realm, and she demanded that the council make Dudley the Lord Protector of England with an income of £20,000 a year, which would be around £5 million in today's money. She believed Dudley would be able to sort the succession out and save England from danger, and she also mentioned that her relationship with Dudley had never been improper. But after 10 days of being incredibly ill, the Queen began to recover from smallpox, and her concerns for England were relieved as she got better. But she now had another large problem, and it was how to avoid too much damage to her face and her skin caused by the smallpox blisters. Many women were left very scarred by the marks, and Elizabeth was determined that she would not be one of these. It was said that after a period of only attending to the marks on her face to avoid disfigurement, Elizabeth returned to court and covered up the worst of the damage to her face and skin with a striking white lead makeup which she is shown in many portraits. There were many women who could not afford this and suffered greatly. For example, Lady Mary Sidney, one of her closest attendants, withdrew from court as foul a lady as the smallpox could make her, alluding to her scars. Her husband would also say of his wife's ordeal, nursing Elizabeth, that when I went to New Haven, I left her a full fair lady, in mine eye at least the fairest, and when I returned I found her as foul a lady as the smallpox could make her, which she did take by continued attendance of her Majesty's most precious person, who was sick of the same disease, the scars of which, to her resolute discomfort, ever since have done and do remain on her face. So as she lies solitary, like a night raving the house, more to my charge than if we boarded together, as we did before, that evil accident happened. With this, it's interesting to consider that Henry Sidney was disgusted with the impact smallpox caused on his wife. He also mentioned that she caught it from the Queen herself, as his wife was nursing her, and that shows us how it could have affected Elizabeth. But despite Elizabeth I's life being spared and saved, as it was possible she could have been killed, she continued to struggle with her smallpox scars for the rest of her life. She was very self-conscious and image-conscious at the time, and she had complete control over her portraits, and she would order painters to repaint images to make her look more attractive. Her skin, it said, was covered with a few smallpox scars, but this was the everlasting impact that the Queen was left with, despite being one of the greatest queens in history. Elizabeth I did have her insecurities and worries, especially with regards to her appearance and beauty. But the situation in 1562 was very dangerous, and she could have easily died from the disease, and many feared that the Queen would die at court. It was a tough time for court, as the young monarch was gravely ill, but she would pull through and go on to become one of the greatest rulers in history. Thank you for watching, and to support, please subscribe to Her Remarkable History. Thank you.